walking as Jesus walked. That's actually a command.
Yeah.
Walk as Jesus, not just know what he said, and not just do what he said, but walk as he walked. That's pretty radical. That's very different. This isn't a project.
Right. Anybody who's ever treated it as a project, they've fallen away because they think that because they're still in the system, they're looking for something other than Jesus. Anytime you're looking for something other than Jesus, you will bust.
If you broaden that out, not 10,000. There's probably 1 million house church groups that approached it as a project. I know, we'll do a little bit different system. It's more like Jesus did in the house instead of in a building. But then they could do exactly the same stuff for the same reasons in the same way. There's, and it's worse probably than in the building, which is more
calendar.
Yeah, but it's more sterile. It's more controlled, and there's a qualified person to be their covering. And they got what they did was they did like I said in the book. It's a feature, not a bug. They want to have the clergy and laity separation in the calendar in order to protect themselves. Because if you slam it in the living room, you got all kinds of yahoos with, their hair standing straight up and barefoot, and they're just now they have the liberty to be an expert. The proof of that is the internet, right? As soon as you give somebody let them have some power, right? Somebody said this recently, that Nobel Prize winners and the average drug addict living in his mother's basement for 35 years have the same power on the internet.
That's true.
Yeah, well, that's what happens in a living room. You take them out of the pew and put them in a living room, and you get all kinds of spiritual illness and mental illness asserting itself. So it's a feature, not a bug, to have a clergyman in charge on a schedule, because they can control it and keep the barefoot, self-proclaimed prophets from controlling the environment. That's why you can't just, add water and mix it up and start having a Sunday morning ecosystem. This can't be done because you haven't done the work yet of refining lives. Purify me, Lord, from ways that aren't of you. Help me purify myself, friend. I'll help you as we rise up, sit down, and walk along the way. Admonish one another, be called alongside one another daily, so that none are hardened and deceived by sin. There's a process involved in making us fit to be able to play our part as a priest. You don't just snap your fingers and, everybody's a priest, when half of them aren't even saved and they don't even know it. So it's a feature, not a bug, that Sunday morning with clergy is tamping down all the potential problems, and you can go away with a great experience, and good people get a little bit of good out of it. Bad people blow it off, and the people that are undecided don't even know they're undecided because they're attending and tithing, so what else is there? So the whole thing is very safe, and it's not in a living room. So moving this into a house is absolutely not only not the right solution, but it's probably worse than, we own housechurch.com. We own homechurchmovement.com. But if you go to those sites, you'll see that what we say about it on those sites is, this is crazy. This is supposed to be about Jesus, not about the venue.
Right.
The venue does not set captives free. Jesus does. And you don't get Jesus by changing your venue. You get a little more participation, but that could be good. And that could be really bad. So if it's not about Jesus every day, the pillar and foundation of truth is the ecclesia, the body of Christ, the give and take of daily priests, the kingdom of priests.
And you kept saying it's a feature. You kept saying it's a feature, not a bug. You're saying they are claiming it's a feature, like that's a feature to them.
I don't think they know it's a feature. I really don't. I think they have over time.
But you're using feature in a negative.
I
way.
am. I'm just,
okay.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If what you're trying to do is not have mayhem, then it's a feature to have a building and clergy and a schedule and attendance and control of the curriculum and just try to do the best you can to move the curriculum on down the line.
Right.
This month we're going to do an expository exploration of the book of Romans, because we all need that. And and you do. Okay, with you. But you could get a lot of people, when you start getting to Romans 9 through 11, going nuts if they have a place to stand. So what you got to do, it's a feature, not a bug. Clergy, it's a feature. We ain't doing that. You got to figure it out together. And you can't figure it out together if there's a lot of carnality and unsaved people and a lot of pride, arrogance, bad experiences, all the childhood things, the DNA things, mental illness.
Yeah.
You can't possibly, and satanic warfare.
Yeah.
Give me a break, man. Our battle's not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers, spiritual forces of wickedness in high places. So we have an enemy. His name is Satan. He's just as real as Jesus. And it's a problem. So if you give him a little bit of a leash, he's going to start biting people with this foaming at the mouth thing. So basically, it's a feature that people have thought of. If we don't want this to turn into chaos, then here's what we have to do. We have to control it. Have to put a geofence around it, not let anybody out, and then shake everybody's hand at the back door and, deal with things before it becomes a problem. So it's a feature, not a bug, in that it's a protection mechanism. It's an antivirus. And it kind of works, and you still get some good out of it, but there's no priesthood. And there's very little growth.
To the ecosystem, it is worse than a bug. It's a deadly virus.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're not willing to do the work of being a nation, a kingdom, priests, alien, strangers, foreigners, dead to the world and the world to you, take up your cross daily, admonish one another daily, bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Confess your sins one to another that you might be healed. If you're not willing to do the 59 one another verses, you're not willing to be called alongside one another daily, because we have a 2-mortgage house we have to keep up, and we have all, we've got a Bermuda vacation coming up, and we've got to save for that, and we don't have time to be doing all this church stuff. If you can push all that on the back burner, then I can live my life any way I want in the world, and there's no risk for me, because I'm punching my time clock on Sunday morning. I got it all. I'm in control of my life. They're in control of my spirituality. Everything works. It's like a finely tuned plastic clock, right? But if you're not willing to do the work, then you're going to lose 70% of your teens. I contend that's genocide, because you could have saved the vast majority. I would say 90% of the teens that fall away, and I can prove this. It's been 40 years now around the world. 90% of the children that fall away could have been saved. So if I've done something, I've built in a way to protect myself and my little system and my little kingdom and my income flow and my title and all that. If I've built something because I'm naive or because I'm greedy, prideful, selfish, shallow, if I've built something that kills 8 million teenagers every 3 years, then that's genocide. There were only 3,000 that died on 9/11 when the Twin Towers came down, and we call that the biggest tragedy in history of America from a terrorist standpoint. Well, guess what? Do the math here. 3,000 versus 8 million every 3 years. Even the fentanyl crisis, 100,000 per year, they say, die. It's 10 times that of the teens that are falling into Satan's clutches, because we're not presenting Jesus carefully enough, properly, the way Jesus intended. We're not presenting him properly. We're not showing them Jesus as they rise up, sit down, and walk along the way. They just go off and do their thing, and they check in, and good parenting is called putting your children's automobile on an app, either in secret or let them know it, but we're tracing their movements. Somehow that's supposed to be good parenting. You're not talking to them about Jesus. You're not giving them the tools they need in the spiritual realm, the breastplate of righteousness, the sword of the Spirit daily.
Helping them see the motives of their heart versus rules, so that they can actually come to Jesus.
That's so important. The rules destroy, Romans 7. The Spirit of God gives life, Romans 8. But it's a lot of work. And you can't do it while you're still busy trying to entertain yourself with Netflix and all these other things. Good parenting is making sure your children are on a good soccer team. That's good parenting? Sorry. What's happening in the locker room? I'll tell you what happened in the locker room. I was in a lot of locker rooms in my sports teams. I'll tell you what goes on in there. Did you ever think of that when you felt so sacrificial driving them around on their traveling team journeys to play in tournaments and thinking of yourself as a good parent? I mean, that's a good thing to do, but why not have all the conversations as you rise up, sit down, walk along the way so that their consciences, not rules, but their consciences, the motives of the heart, the living and active word, not a bunch of Bible verses, the living and active word, the applied verses of God to their situation with your own testimony of, and here's what it was like when I was growing up. What do you think? Looking them in the eye. You're not paying attention. You're waiting until I'm done. Talk to me. What do you really think and feel? If you're not willing to do that kind of work, you will lose 8 million every 3 years, which makes 9/11 and the pandemic. There's only, we lose 1 million people in the U.S. in COVID? I think 1 million people died in the U.S. over the course of several years from COVID that they're willing to admit, right? There's people like me who had their heart valve blown up and so on, but
More than
yeah, let's say it's 2 million. They downgraded it by half. That's still only a fourth of what happens every 3 years from the youth groups, and these are church-going children. Take another 8 or 10 million that are Charlie Kirk fans or whatever that aren't church attenders, and they'd be attracted to Jesus, but they don't. Their parents don't go to church, and they don't feel comfortable doing that. So call it 16 million young people every 3 years, just in the United States, that could have been attracted to Jesus if we'd bothered to walk like Jesus walked, not just talk about what Jesus talked about. A lot of people, a lot of souls at stake.
Going back to what you said a minute ago, you said, I know what happens in the locker rooms. I know, when you're driving your children to soccer practice, because you're driving your children to soccer practice, and that's a good thing. And a couple of us were talking the other night because it was like, don't you know what happens in those locker rooms? Don't you know what happens in those youth group times? Don't you remember when you... And it's not, and I was thinking about it because I thought, are parents just duped by that? And I thought, no, they remember if they were in that, and they're not duped by it. They know what's in the locker rooms. They know what that situation is like if they had any experience at all, and I can't think that it's changed. Yet they don't know how to have those conversations that get to the motives of the heart, because it's just not who they've been or who they've been shown that that's who Jesus is, and that's how he lived with his disciples, with those that were around him. He exposed the motives of the heart and helped people see his life and what needed to actually change, and invited them to that. And so it's not that they don't know what happens in the locker rooms, it's that they don't even know. They sit back in fear, probably, not even knowing. They're afraid to cross that line.
That is part of it. I've watched that. I remember driving down a highway one time and a lot of stoplights, and I saw 2 young people in the back seat of a car making out while Dad dutifully drove the car. They weren't old enough to have their license, and so they're making out all over each other. We'll pull up to a stoplight, and I look over just innocently, and they're all over each other, and Dad's just got his hands glued to the steering wheel because he does not even want to look in the rearview mirror, and he's sure not going to say anything. So there is that fear factor, but there's another side of it too, and that's the learned hopelessness that's addressed in the book. You got to sow your wild oats. I heard somebody on the news not long ago saying, I can't wait for my child to graduate high school another year from now so they can have the college experience. You know what that college experience is? Yeah, we've all seen the videos of spring breaks and this, that, and the other, but even just dorm life, everyday activity on a college campus, and they think their child needs to have the college experience. They're sure that they do. That's just learned hopelessness, because they're saying to themselves, or saying it out loud to everybody else, they got to sow their wild oats. Maybe someday they'll give their lives to Jesus when they see how wretched the world is. But the fact is, the churches have, 50% of that same stuff's going on in there too. And they already know that from the youth group. So, there's only one solution here, and that is to walk as Jesus walked. Everything works together for the good for those that love him, are called according to his purposes, so that he might bend them into the stature of Christ, verse 29, right? So that they'll come into the family likeness of Jesus. So that's a process that we have to participate in, and if we think we can just shove it down into one little pigeonhole category, some niche, 1.19% of a week of 2 hours on Sunday morning, if we think that's going to push back the gates of hell, we really think that's going to war with principalities and powers, to give them a lecture they're not even paying attention to, and probably more bad experiences and bad input from peer pressure than you can imagine, plus a lot of bad examples of, hypocritical worship leaders that they know what their real life is. I mean, all that stuff's just a mishmash of confusion. And there's so much sincerity in that environment that gets lost in all the contradictions that learn hopelessness. People that are sincere just give up.